so we are continuing our kind of guided exploration through different kinds of stacked ways to present the content that you are working up as an interpreter in the development phase of things. And you're putting together that big 5-point outline full of thematic points or chunks of content. This is more of a format than a content thing. Obviously, a living history demonstration or living history facility or site and set of stationary interpretation kinds of things has a lot to do with the content as well, but a lot of these really are kind of content agnostic, right? We can have a guided hike on 1,000,001 different topics, and that's okay. It's good that a lot of these tools are really about as flexible as they could be. Down at the bottom here, I'm going to add something to the list that some of you in the back may not be able to see. Below crafts, I'm going to write fora, plural of forums, and discussions. For spots like Manzanar, where it is both historic interpretation, cultural interpretation, and it is a sensitive topic in particular, stepping out of the way and handing the mic over to folks that are affected or strongly interested in this for whatever reasons they self-identify, that is an awesome way to be present and part of the conversation as National Park Service Ranger in that particular example, or person facilitating and structuring the interpretation with whatever organization or private group you are working with. Okay? So we've had a chance to talk on Monday a little bit about amphitheater talks, and we can all sort of imagine those in our mind's eye, whether it's a PowerPoint presentation like they do at Mammoth Cave, or just a regular old school amphitheater kind of thing where somebody kind of delivers a lecture. Some of the very first interpretive, formally put together and structured interpretive activities were at national parks and vacation resorts out west, as facilitated by basically a resort developer named Charles Gatey. And he brought in folks like college professors to just sit around the campfire or sit next to a big campfire in an amphitheater and talk with guests about the natural world that they were in. A lot of folks coming in from the big city in the early 1900s, kind of in the roaring 20s, folks who could afford it in the 1930s and 40s through the Great Depression, which hit a lot of people pretty hard, but other folks kind of coasted on through. He would bring in experts, and that was the thing, amphitheater talks. And it was a nice way for folks to have something constructive to do before rural electrification, starting in the 1930s and really not completing until the 60s and 70s to a lot of national parks. That was something folks could do in a structured and constructive way. When you have a bunch of people out on vacation with nothing to do, problems can sort of erupt if they don't have anything constructive to guide their energy into. So, amphitheater talks we talked about, those are pretty straightforward. You can develop the outline for that, move through that stuff, call it a night after an hour or two of chatting with folks, and then everybody sort of wanders off to their tent or their room in the lodge or their cabin nearby, and everybody's trip continues on hunky-dory. That is pretty weather dependent. So a lot of these amphitheater talks also took the shape of so-called magic lantern talks. As it turns out, environmental interpretation was one of the professional fields that went as hard as absolutely possible on new forms of communication technologies. So, these were some of the very first spots where movie projectors were set up. And it wasn't that you paid a ticket and watched, Charlie Chaplin running from the train with the film sped up and so forth. It was like early nature documentaries and so forth. And so you'd have, before a lot of these early projection scenes had sound, back in the old movies, somebody would be playing piano with a soundtrack written for that particular black and white silent film or monochromatic film. These Magic Lantern talks were essentially that. So this is something you'd set up in the lobby of the lodge, or maybe the cafeteria of the lodge, which you can see 200, 300, 400, 500 people. And the acoustics aren't great, right? Those early projectors, not real bright, because if you get too bright of a light behind it, it's literally going to set the celluloid or cellulose-based film on fire. And that occasionally happened in movie theaters up until the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, before the switch over to digital. But these Magic Lantern talks were like the new hotness 100 years ago. Like that was a bleeding edge new technology. And that reliance on seeking new ways to connect with people, new ways to open up the natural world around us, new ways to bring old history back to life. Interpretive, like photographic reconstruction experts have been using things like artificial intelligence and physical airbrushing before there was stuff like Photoshop to colorize old photos to help recontextualize what folks are looking at, help folks more easily understand, oh wow, yeah, these were people, and nobody's smiling in these old photos because the exposure times on these photos was really long, and you had to hold very still, or you get this weird, ghostly, blurry, creepy looking kind of photo. People in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the old daguerreotype photos and emulsions and stuff like that, you know, they look like that era that we associate of photos of very stiffly sitting or standing people, nobody smiling, nobody moving. There are no action shots, really, in the 1800s with early photos. But interpreters use these new technologies, new at the time, as any means to kind of punch through that sense of, okay, we're just on vacation, we're just relaxing. It's like these people came so far and they've come to such an amazing place. Let's help get them that last step out of the normal brain-dead life script of grow up, go to school, get married, have a kid, or 2 or 5 or 10, and pay off a mortgage, get old, and die, and move to Florida.
After you die?
Or, you know, particular. Maybe get shipped as ashes to Florida. I don't know. Shipped over to the Space Coast to get blasted off in a rocket with Elon Musk's next Tesla on its way to Mars. Whatever. So the idea here is we are allowed to and encourage very strongly to go hard after new technology. So if you're kind of a gearhead, if you're the one getting the new version of a phone because it's got some new sensor in it, I guess the latest iPhone coming out now has a satellite communication chip in it for emergency purposes. Some interpreter is going to find a way to leverage that once it becomes available for anything other than purely emergency purposes, right? And the technology just keeps advancing like that. So some of the very first applications of virtual reality, when the headsets were huge, weighed like 5-10 pounds back in about mid-1990s, the first VR headsets came out. I remember putting one on at Kings Island and basically playing a one-on-one first-person shooter, like a literal first-person perspective 3D shooter back in the 90s, and that was a big deal back then. The other place that those showed up, other than extremely high-end arcades, was at national park visitor centers and places like Disney went pretty hard, pretty early into virtual reality as a way to get people into sort of this mindset of, I'm not just on my basic life script autopilot brain dead mode. I am open and receptive to this new kind of mind-blowing thing. So this semester, if you are kind of a nerd, kind of a geek into programming or tech-related stuff, when we get into units like game design and challenge design, if you want your game to be a simple computer game, you can do that this semester. I'll help work with you on that and show you how. Some of the very first podcasts weren't podcasts at all, but like cassette audio tours of places like the Colosseum in Rome. And travel personalities, if you're familiar with Rich Steves, here's an example of a personal audio tour. Art museums and interpreters in a non-staffed format were the first to go real hard on personal audio tours as a way to make it more interesting, make it feel and seem and be understandable as more personal and personalized versus just reading the same pamphlet in the same order in the same way that everybody else does. Okay? And certainly these days podcasts are both kind of pretty quaint and old school, like things your parents listen to, but also pretty big deal, right? Folks like Joe Rogan make a lot of money, reach a lot of people through podcasts, non-traditional broadcast media. Pretty cool stuff. All right, regardless of anyone's opinions on Joe Rogan, the example stands as just the power of using these communication technologies. So we are strongly incentivized and encouraged this semester to try that stuff out. If you've never made a podcast before, you can do that as part of our non-staffed modes chunk of the class coming up. Okay, so we'll put a pin in that one, metaphorically speaking, and so forth. I'm going to also talk to you a little bit about living history and saw some examples or talk through some examples of what living history looks like at national battlefields, at places like the home place, an 1850s working, living farm with period authentic everything, top to bottom. And we also saw a couple of real quick examples of things like parts of guided hikes. So let's see. We saw this short clip of a guy at the end of a guided hike signing off on folks' Junior Ranger guidebooks and kind of swearing in Junior Rangers. They pass out the little laser cut wooden these days. They used to give out plastic ones, but it's now they're transitioning to wooden laser cut Ranger badges for little kids. It's awesome, and they get so excited about it. The kids do too. The Rangers get pretty excited about it. It's a lot of fun. It's super cute. If you've never been on a guided hike, well, we should address that, but here's another stop on that same hike, and you see how interactive and personalized this is. This is conversations between the ranger and individual people, as well as to the group. And as you can see, on the left side of the frame here, we've got a whole bunch of other people walking by on like the one main sidewalk that is, 10, 15 feet back from the lip of the Grand Canyon. Other people see folks crowded around this ranger, and it's an awesome way to start with a group of 10 and end with a group of 80 or 90 people. And that's a good thing. Now, you're much more limited in the format and size and pace and structure of a guided hike or a cave tour, where the environment imposes very strict and severe safety concerns and so forth. But in most other places, these guided hikes are intentionally not taking people real far away from the visitor center, mostly because as the group gets bigger and bigger, we're going to have more folks with less mobility, and we just have a slower traveling speed, so we're going to get less far on that loop, wherever that is. But it's explicitly kind of right next to the crowds, but off to the side of the crowds, so that those crowds can do something, can, even by serendipity or accident, discover something more engaging and interesting than just walking back and forth between their lodge and like the ice cream shop that's there in South Rim Village. For those of you coming on summer camp, save a couple of bucks or a lot of bucks for ice cream at the Grand Canyon. It'll be pretty hot there, most likely. Okay, so guided hikes. Let's see, we'll take a look at this section of it here. This is another stop on that same hike. This is one of the museums, and the particular talk is a condor talk. It's 45 minutes long, and it is right at the edge of the Grand Canyon, where you'll see them soaring on thermals maybe 500 or 600 feet below you. or a couple of thousand feet up above you, depending on the time of day, depending on the air current, and the convective vortices that they get to soar on, and so forth. Okay? So a guided hike is more than, or it can be more than, just get this group of folks, walk them away from everything else, talk, chat, interact, do your thing, make some jokes like Shelton Johnson did, play a little wooden recorder tune. It can also be right there in all of the action. All right? So you want to think about what are some more flexible things that I can build into my 5-part outline, in particular in part 3, the content section, and how could that scale very rapidly from 10 people in my group to 80 people in my group without losing any momentum, without paying any extra overhead of having to re-explain something as more people come in. Okay, it takes a little bit of forethought and design. So this is something that we cover in this class for that reason. All right, we just briefly on Monday mentioned wayside station interpretation. Let's talk a little bit more about station interp. Things like skill demonstrations, things like living history, which may include skill demonstrations. The station interp, everything with an asterisk is where you are planted and people are coming to you and wandering away when their curiosity is satisfied, or they've seen the skill that you're demonstrating, or what have you. One kind of station interpretation is at the information desk. So it's very commonly public-facing staff that are stationed at the information desk on purpose, which, like, if you're into forestry, staffing the info desk, like the front desk in the visitor center kind of a thing, would be generally what the info desk is. At a place like Grand Canyon South Rim Village, there's something like, I don't know, maybe 24 different info desks in that village across each of the different places. There's just so much going on. If we had everybody converging on one info desk, it would be, as Jeff Foxworthy used to say in the Redneck Comedy Tour, Pandelirium. So we'll take a look at station interp and specifically info desk, what that looks like. So if you've ever been to Crab Orchard and chatted with the folks there, with the the nature exhibits and so forth, over on Route 148, this is the kind of thing, this is what that looks like. Now, this looks almost exactly the same, even though it's a different agency. This is National Park Service versus Fish and Wildlife, again over at Crab Orchard. And this is at Rocky Mountain National Park. They have 3 different visitor centers that I'm aware of at Rocky, and each one is big and very, very busy. They have 2 on 2 different roads coming out of the same town, Estes Park, as you go into the park on the east side, because there's just a ton of people with a ton of questions. Now, there are a couple of things to notice here in an info desk interp environment. The interaction is designed to be fairly short. So, this is not a have folks for a 45-minute talk on condors at the rim of the Grand Canyon. This is 3 to 5 minutes for the whole thing. And most of the whole thing is going to be this. You open up the map. Remember, we can't make any assumptions about this person knowing anything about where they are entering for the first time. Most folks are coming to Rocky for the first time. Some have been coming there every summer for 50 years, and they got it. The folks who've been coming for 50 years, they don't need the info desk. Everybody else kind of does. So, info desk interpreters are staffed and trained to do one thing really well, and to be able to use that one tool, that one interaction of 3 to 5 minutes with very, very high positive impact. So, as you're walking up, they'll pull out a copy of the park or forest or wildlife refuge map and open it up and turn it around. So they're reading it upside down. And they do this a lot each day, so they get pretty good at the reading upside down part. They're going to ask a couple of questions. Hey, what brings you to Rocky Mountain National Park today? Is this a family group? Are you here with a school? Are you here with your kids? They're trying to get a very quick sense of, okay, so what are the basic creature comfort needs that this particular person, this particular group, or this particular couple of people need? Everybody needs to know where the bathroom is. Everybody needs to be fairly clear on where they're going next. So have you guys had a chance to set up your tent? Oh, you came in an RV. Did you have any trouble backing it into Rocky would be like Glacier Basin Campground, where we'll be staying for summer camp. So they're covering some real quick early logistics kind of stuff. Boring, crunchy, like what are your travel requirements? Do you need a bathroom? It's right over your left shoulder, but it's kind of behind that display rack of maps, so make sure not to miss it and move on by. And as they're doing that, asking those questions, they're unfolding that map, opening the book map to a map of the park, and they're asking for more information about what brings you here. Are you here to hike? Okay, well that's one conversation. Are you here to see the caribou? That's another conversation. And they have, typically it's like a gel pen or like a Sharpie is very, very common. They're marking up the map as you go. They're drawing right on the thing. So if you're here to have a snowball fight at 12,000 feet in July, all right, you're gonna be up on the Skyline Drive highway that goes through Rocky Mountain National Park. That's right here on the map. And it's more than just pointing to it, because remember, humans can only remember 5 to 7 things, hold that much in working memory. And this brief map chat may easily go over 5 to 7 things. And for each thing, there might be more than one answer. So, okay, if you are really here to see elk and caribou, all right, you want to go to this area here. You want to drive real slow through this area here. Be careful. We have a lot of animal vehicle collisions in this particular section of the park at this time of year because of the rut, for example. And you want to, when you get to your campground, circle that too. Over on the west side of the campground at this time of year, keep an eye out for the cow reindeer and their young, browsing the new buds in the little meadow that was just restored last summer at the edge of that campground. Very cool stuff. So at sunrise and sunset, that's where you want to set up your big spotting scopes and those big, 300-400 millimeter like telephoto lenses on your cameras. I see you guys have some photographic equipment hanging off you today. Good hunting. May the shots that you take with your camera be really awesome and highly effective. Okay? So, station interpretation, again, really pretty short. And it's short by design because there might be a line of 10, 15, 25 people at that desk waiting for the same kind of information. This is typically not, the Park Service in particular is very much at pains to separate things like getting your permits and reservations to go backpacking and stuff like that. They separate it out from this. That is information transfer. That's logistics stuff. That's monetary transactions. This is interp. So we remove at the larger, busier national parks and so forth, the need to buy anything from these guys and gals so that they can focus on interpreting things and using a map as the interpretive tool instead of a hike, instead of an amphitheater, instead of a set of VR goggles or whatever. A good old paper map, a dead tree version of the geographic data involved. We're going to interpret the basic data on that map and help it come alive in context for that specific individual. All right? So if you really like hanging out with and talking to people, like you're definitely an extrovert, Infodesk, Info Station, Interp is your bag, baby, as Austin Powers might say in the late 1990s. Okay? So, that's pretty cool stuff. It's pretty cool stuff to me. Let's take a quick look here at some Infodesk interactions at a couple different places. And this one, yeah, this is at Grand Canyon again. All right? So he pulls open that map. In this case, it's a laminated map. He pulls open the non-laminated one, pulls out that pen, and starts marking it up. It's the same thing all day, day in, day out. And this is me, as your professor, jumping on that grenade with being the creep filming people in public at a, yeah, that gets weird fast. But we have a higher moral imperative to learn this stuff for Interp. So there you go. Okay? And that's all it is. All day long. And you'll see interpreters rotate in and out of this. So that same person is the guy who led that guided hike, that Condor talk, about which we saw 2 clips today and 1 clip on Monday. So if you're not super duper extroverted as a forester or a rec person and you're more happy out on the hoof, so to speak, walking around doing things, unlocking the landscape in the landscape instead of talking about the landscape through a map, don't worry. You can, especially over time, sort of work into roles where you get to set the balance of how much you're doing guided hikes all day long versus how much you're at the info desk all day long, or any of the balances in between. Okay? That sum up to 100% of your time. There's a lot, typically, of breaks and rests and rotations because it's very difficult physiologically for not even the muscles, but just the flaps of flesh, your vocal flaps, your vocal cords as they're called. It's a lot of strain on those to be talking all day long. So there's a ton of breaks and rotation built into this kind of a schedule. Don't worry if it seems intimidating. All right, so here's the video for Rocky. Sorry for my shaky cam. Hidden camera, right? Secret shopper? Okay.
Right.
A couple of things we want to notice here.
Okay. What's happening with Trail Ridge is because there was so much snow in late spring.
She's explaining something. She's not relating rules. So we have law enforcement rangers, conservation police, forest protection officers, depending on the agency. It's all the same thing, just different titles because every agency has to invent their own jargon, whatever. All the same thing. We have other folks who are writing tickets in pretty places and hauling drunks over to Yellowstone jail to dry out overnight and stuff like that. Here, this is explaining, hey, our climate here at Rocky might be a little bit different than you're used to. You said you guys were driving in from Florida over the course of about 6 months, stopping at a bunch of places. Well, Rocky's pretty different than Florida. Let's unpack some things like what it means to drive your recreational vehicle over the highway at 11,000 feet, and how the partial pressure of oxygen is going to be really pretty different up there. You might feel a little bit lightheaded, and your engine might start sounding a little bit lightheaded too. Don't panic. You'll get over the pass just fine. Everybody does. And so forth. And if you need to stop and sort of catch your breath, we've got a visitor center up at 12,000 feet as well. Stop by there and have some hot chocolate and soup and have a good old time. If you look at this text here, I don't know if I get a good shot of it in this video. This is from several years ago when I was using one of those filthy casual Android phones, so the camera's real shaky. See how it says, "In love with Rocky Mountain National Park"? Our class is fundamented or built upon the foundation of interpreting things that you love, things that you're passionate about, things that you feel strongly about, even if it's a negative emotion, if it's concerning, or you feel some fear about it. Like, we should go there and talk about that stuff, because those are the things that your gut is telling you matters. If your gut's telling you that it matters, probably other folks are feeling much the same thing. So, this provides some information about volunteering with the park. These two ladies are volunteers working with the United States National Parks. Actually, this one in the vest, that's a ranger, Interp ranger. And this one here is also in the green and gray uniform, but has a volunteer badge on her shoulder. So it's a hybrid effort. There's way too many people. There's so much to interpret that the Park Service cannot rely on paid staff alone. So typically folks who are volunteering in this capacity, like you get a free campsite for 6 months and like a small stipend. You're not an employee, but they'll help take care of you and make it possible for you to, in your retirement, for example, interpret with the park for 6 months. And there is a long line of people willing to provide and excited to provide this kind of essentially free labor for the American government, federal government, which is weird and awkward. But like volunteering for a couple hours a day in return for 6 months in the campground at Rocky Mountain National Park, yeah, sign me up. That'd be pretty sweet. Okay? Like I gotta pay loans and stuff like that instead, so, other kinds of work for now, but maybe if we survive World War III here with Russia and Ukraine, this might be a pretty good gig for a while. Okay, so a lot of people will sell their homes, buy a motorhome, kit it out real nice, and spend 6 months at Rocky. And then when the weather gets too cold at Rocky, they'll head down to someplace in, Big Bend in Texas, where you guys were, for backpacking, or down in Florida or the Alabama coast, something like that. And they'll do a northern tier, southern tier, northern tier, southern tier for years, until they don't particularly feel like doing it anymore, or health considerations come into play, or whatever. So this is a very, very, very common setup. All right. So that's pretty much info desk. Has anybody ever had this interaction before? Yeah, look how many people just in this room, right? I mean, more than half the class. So this is a thing. It's a very important thing because it is so widespread in people's experience. At the far end of this, though, we'll have away from typically the visitor center, because we don't want a whole bunch of kids and adults and families and mixed groups of varying sizes splayed out, playing around with paints and, in this case, gourds and stuff like that, kind of clogging up the traffic pattern in those visitor centers. But at some of the outdoor facilities nearby, stuff like arts and crafts is another kind of station and turf where folks can be in the park and practice with arts and crafts using local, sustainably sourced, kind of authentic materials instead of building yet another ABS plastic Lego version of a thing, or as it's pronounced on the continent, Lego. So crafts are a thing. If you have an artistic bent in any way and can paint something without getting the paintbrush stuck into your frontal lobe, then consider taking some of your classmates on an arts and crafts exercise this semester as a way to practice any of these things. You get to choose across all of these modes, staffed and non-staffed, for presenting whatever content you would like to. Another format for not info desk, but another kind of station-based interpretation are the one-off or short-term events like stargazing, particular unusual astronomical events. Right now, there is a bright green comet transiting our sky. That's pretty cool. And so the national parks, most all of which are a part of the International Dark Skies Initiative, more info on that in the park management class in the fall, they do stuff like interpret solar eclipses, because every 5-10 years there's another solar eclipse transiting some part of the United States. And so the Park Service blows the dust off of their sun spotting scopes. It's a regular spotting scope with a really, really powerful UVA through UVC filter, because the UVC stuff will cook your DNA real fast and your retinas even faster. And just set them up and organize that event. And eclipses typically happen over a course of minutes, or maybe if it's really, really rare, over the course of an hour or more. But for the most part, this is kind of a one-off thing. And you may not be passionate about solar eclipses, but it's pretty darn cool. It's okay to indulge your curiosity and interpret it to lots and lots of other people, given that you'll have access to better equipment than most of them, especially if they're traveling. So, if you guys remember the 2017 eclipse that had its biggest totality over Carbondale here, and NASA showed up, was in the SIU Saluki Stadium and so forth. Grand Teton was also along that arc. It kind of came down through Washington State, through Wyoming here, and peaked You may not like it, but this is what peak eclipse looks like over Carbondale, Illinois. And in, was it 2027? 4 years from now, we have another one coming up that also crosses over Carbondale.
2024.
24, thank you. It was 7 years after 2017, 2024. You're right. That's where the 7th is. So we're gonna, do that again, and I believe NASA's coming back and so forth. And the Park Service very regularly sets up this kind of a one-off interpretive event as a station kind of interpretation. They'll start advertising that months in advance in a way that they don't advertise a lot of guided hikes across the whole country months in advance. You just show up and join whatever guided hikes are available that day. Okay? Any questions about station interpretation as we're moving along here? So far, so good? It's pretty straightforward stuff, but is anybody getting a sense of this particular kind of interp, maybe infodesk interp or whatever, not really my thing. Like, I don't see myself enjoying that, 6 hours a day at all. Anybody along those lines? Be honest. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not an infodesk kind of guy either. I don't like being chained to a computer and talking in front of people like that. It's no fun. But are there any of these that you could kind of get into, like whatever a modern equivalent of a Magic Lantern tour might be? If you're more into technology, or maybe you've done a podcast before, like a personalized audio tour equivalent, or you really like arts and crafts, or you really like, I don't know, napping points and knives and spearheads and stuff like that, and you can get into that this semester. Anybody seeing anything across these modes so far that might be interesting? Okay, just out of curiosity, what kind of resonates with you so far? Anybody?
About my one at Park Service, right here by the house.
Okay. Right on. Okay.
I really like leading interpretive hikes, but also I also enjoy meeting people, as far as accessibility, that kind of thing. I've been the info desk person before.
Cool.
I'm kind of interested in all of it. It works with my ADHD, I can jump around.
Yeah, right on. How about you, Mahaji?
I like arts and crafts, but I'm also interested in napping and artifacts, recreating for.
All right. Good deal. Excellent. I really enjoy the living history stuff and the skill demos in particular because it feels a little bit more active, like we're doing something, But totally a personal preference thing. You don't have to impress me by doing a skill demo if you know that I like them, right? My particular preferences don't matter, quite frankly. All of these are useful in their own way. Okay, let's see. So at this point, we've had a chance to talk about, or at least touch on, most all of these so far. We'll get a little bit more into skill demos coming up, and here for a bit we want to talk about games and challenges. So, games are a huge part of environmental interpretation. A, because games are really, really, really good at helping you communicate and connect with folks through figurative communication. Every game, hear this is important. Every game is a metaphor of some real world event or cycle or sequence or process. So, for example, chess is a metaphor for what? For war, exactly. We got kings and queens and knights and footmen or pawns and so on and so forth. And there's a strategic land control sense of how a game of chess unfolds. How about the game of Clue, which is foremost on my mind since we just saw the Clue-inspired play at the Varsity this past week. What is Clue, the old board game, a metaphor of? Anybody know?
Mystery.
A whodunit mystery, yeah, a murder mystery. Exactly. And how that plays out, figuring out who done it. All right. What about sharks and minnows? What's that a metaphor of? Anybody know?
Food chain.
Say again?
The food chain.
The food chain or the food web. Population dynamics of predator and prey species. All right. How about, well, sports games like football, for example. Battle. Yeah. I was listening to a radio discussion. I don't know if nobody listens to the radio. I'm old right here. About how, I guess, is this the first Super Bowl where it's going to be 2 African American quarterbacks? That's pretty cool. Anyway, so the announcers or the radio commentators were talking about how, for the first time, these two are going to meet on the field of battle. And repeated chronic traumatic encephalopathy aside from people's brains getting Swiss cheese by hard hits and so forth, these guys aren't actually battling each other. Like, they're not trying to take prisoners of war or blow each other up in expeditious ways. They're playing a sports game. Like, they're men in tights running around throwing a leather ball and like lots and lots of advertising money going into it. It's not a real battle, but it sure feels like one. All of that language that goes around it, meeting on the field of battle and opposing forces and armchair quarterbacking, strategic general level warfare. Okay, so with games and challenges, whatever the central topic is that you're talking about, it's naturally typically going to suggest one or several games that you can play. Now, any of those games might be more or less appropriate for an interpretive hike, for example, and you probably need to make some modifications to a game to make it more meaningful than just playing a game for the sake of playing a game, for the sake of kind of low-grade entertainment, watching or participating in some symbolic thing. But games are also really, really, really good at engaging us, because once we give folks permission, license, even encouragement to get involved, it's pretty amazing how deeply people get into it. If you've ever seen somebody like stand up off the couch at home and like spill the beer where it was sitting off of their belly as like that 1 second touchdown happens or field goal that switches winner and loser and so forth. Games, even passively participating in the game by watching a game from thousands of miles away on a big screen TV, it involves us. It pulls us in, metaphorically speaking. Yeah. Games are powerful in that way. They're way more interactive when you give folks the ability to choose how to affect the outcome. Okay? So, let's take a quick break here. It's about quarter till. Go ahead and stand up. Get some water, reinflate your brain and your intervertebral discs. Lower that blood pressure a little bit. And come back to it with games and challenges.
That's funny you brought up Clue. I played Clue for the first time this last weekend.
Awesome. Was it Colonel Mustard in the study with the candlestick?
Played about 4 times. My kids loved it. That's the first time I've actually ever played it.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. My dad recently found online like a first edition of the game from way back, like 1950 or whatever it was.
I've been trying to find a movie for my kids since we played it.
Yeah.
I forgot to make a movie about it. I figured I might
The one with was it Tim Curry?
do that. Yeah, that's about all I remember. I remember seeing it as a little kid, and that's it.
Yeah, it was like in the 1990s or something.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a good, clean movie. It's good. They may not get some stuff about like jokes about J. Edgar Hoover and communism and stuff like that, but yeah. Now, I didn't realize there was it was the version of the board game that I grew up on was based on a movie from like the 60s or 70s. Apparently, there was an older one, like way back. Yeah. Back when people still smoked cigarettes inside and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I like the interpretation and the public engagement. The more I think about it, the more. But you know, we have like private lands, forestry, and do a lot of public, private landowners. We've got that nature center in Winona. They have interpretation and all that.
Yeah, public contact is critically important. Otherwise, people just get out of sync with what the agencies are trying to do, and like it might even be a completely legit land management thing, but it's like this us versus them thing that sort of has arisen because nobody's talking. And it's like we could just like we're all trying to
We really do
basically
a
get
lot
the
of
same
that.
thing.
Just people don't know that because there's a lot of bad history back with Park Service and
Yeah,
Forest Service.
for sure. Yeah.
We're still government agencies, and we're a lot of times thought on the same thing. You guys don't like, not us, We're all defending.
Okay. All right, let's jump into our next module. So, this is going to be one of those moments for hopefully one of the dwindling number of times when we're going to be talking about doing exciting stuff and interesting, tricky stuff, instead of just doing exciting and interesting and tricky stuff. Dancing about architecture, as this thing goes. But game design, because it is so powerfully affective and powerfully effective. So affective means it can change our mood, our affect. Effective is powerful, efficacious, useful in accomplishing something. Show of hands. How many of you guys and gals have played a game, not just passively viewed a game, but played one in the past 12 months? Not just about everybody. How about in the past 30 days? Played a game. All right. Past week. Almost everybody. Past day. Interesting. Most of the class has played a game within the past 24 hours. A lot of these things, a lot of these other things, we have not done in the past 24 hours. So games are ubiquitous these days with our personal addiction devices. And also highly effective in helping us to think about, in a safe way, something that might otherwise be pretty intimidating even to think about because it's complex, or it sounds like it's locked behind a bunch of jargon, or something like that. But games have this really interesting way of making frustrating things safe and even engaging and fun. And we'll talk about how games do that with kind of the rest of today's discussion. So this is not about playing games or even facilitating games yet. This is about game design. How do you cobble one together according to your needs? Now, the easy, quick way out, sort of the quick and dirty recipe for game design and interpretation is to take some game that is pretty close to the metaphor that you're trying to accomplish. Something that is at least vaguely about your topic or your subtopic in one thematic point. So a game itself that lasts, soup to nuts, start to finish, 3 to 5 minutes. And it's just one stop along your hike. The skill challenge, much the same way. Maybe you spend a little bit more time on it and do fewer stops along the way. Up to you for a fixed length overall hike. So, this though is a little bit of a deeper dive. But if you get sort of freaked out by the idea of having to design a game, which can be a tricky thing. Games are easy to design, they're hard to design well, which is why there's 1.5 million games out there on Steam. Maybe your humble bundle Steam library is pretty enormous, but relatively few games that you go back to over and over and over. The very well-designed games. Let's talk a little bit about what goes into making a game that is effective for interpretation. So in order to do that, we're going to talk about games that are effective in general and how to get there. It is a lot. So this is unfortunately one of those boring, like note-takey, lecture-y sorts of minutes for the class, so that we can set ourselves up for designing some fun games and enjoying playing them the rest of the semester and throughout life. All right. So our goal here is to build useful games from scratch. Again, there are 1,000-page long binders and books full front to back in Project WET, Project Wild, Project Learning Tree. There are huge compendia of games and activities and skill challenges for use with interpretation that many folks have put together for you up to this point. But if you ever find yourself in the situation of, no, I think I can do better, this is one workflow or tool set that you might adopt. We're going to use some documents and files and exercises from experts in the industry. Part of my background is in video game building and design and construction, so we'll use a lot of examples from the video game industry. So we are wired to, this is the central or core mechanic of each of these games, collect things. It feels good when you conceptually have, even if it's some made-up imaginary virtual token like an NFT or something like that, it feels cool. Like if I had 0 of them yesterday and I have 3 today, nice. Collecting things, fill in the blank. The game that is wrapped around, the billion-dollar empire that is wrapped around the phrase, gotta catch 'em all, is what game? Pokemans, yeah. Collecting things, Animal Crossing, lots of fun. Gacha games, gashapon games, if you're familiar with those from the Japanese game industry. All right, accruing points. Has anybody played Cookie Clicker from like 2012? Do you remember Cookie Clicker at all?
Yeah, you sit there, click a cookie, you build some farms, and
Yeah, which give you more cookies per
Yeah.
click, and eventually you like start hiring grandmothers, and I won't ruin the end of the game for you, but you just, like, that's the whole game. You just click stuff, and then you spend some of those clicks to get like more cookies per click. That's the whole thing. And yet it was this huge internet sensation like 10 years ago because it's an absolutely bananas storyline that evolves out of like setting up these cookie factories and eventually like taking over the planet and stuff. Anyway, it goes way worse, way darker than that. Poker is a pretty abstract game, but a lot of people play poker. And all you do in poker is, in a hand-by-hand way, outscore or outplay other players by having specific combinations of cards that are more statistically rare. And then you roll those points that you get per hand into chips or pennies, or if you're playing for M&Ms, a big pile of M&Ms or whatever, okay? Accruing points feels good. Gathering things, even though the point values are completely made up and arbitrary. Some of the most popular, well-played games of all time, like Tetris, which is so powerfully, on a base neurological level, affecting that people dream regularly in Tetris when they've been playing for a while. The whole idea of Tetris is just abstract points gathering from fitting things together. It's very satisfying to fit stuff together, and you get points for it. As it turns out, our low level, our hindbrain, our lizard level brain is preconscious. It is below the level of rational thought, but it understands gathering. So even if what you're gathering is totally arbitrary, totally made up, jackpot. Mario, the original Mario game, 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom, based on which company or country you were in at the time, in the very early 90s and late 80s, you could just accrue points. There was nothing you could do to lose points. In fact, you could only move rightward on the screen because there wasn't enough memory to keep where you had been and how you'd affected the level behind you still loaded. That part of Mario's world ceased to exist the moment it went off the screen. But we can tick up the points that you get for picking up animated coins, the size of Mario himself, and so forth. And it felt good. A lot of people played all the way to Bowser throwing hammers in the final castle. All right. Collecting feedback. That is, feedback on how am I doing relative to myself as I was. How am I doing now? How am I doing relative to other players? How am I doing relative to my larger peer group? We, as reasoning, intelligent beings, are constantly looking for feedback. Some evolutionary anthropologists say this goes all the way back to several 100,000 years ago in the African veldt, the Rift Valley, and so forth. Rift Valley was up to a couple of million years ago with like Australopithecus, stuff like that. Very, very early hominids. Collecting feedback is basic survival strategy. We need information. To see the tufted tail of a savanna lion, I guess it was a white lion. Savannah lion's a magic card. Anyway, to see that tufted tail above the grasses in the African savanna, you need that information. It's like, oh man, I'm getting stalked by a lion right now. That's valuable information to have. How do I make a decision out of that? Collecting feedback, deeply wired into us. So games like Never Have I Ever. Who has done that thing? Take a shot, or stand up, or do something else embarrassing, or whatever. Poker. Stardew Valley is a feedback collection central mechanic game. Games that incentivize and make addictive exchanges of perceived value. Things like the, what do they call it in World of Warcraft, the bartering house or auction house or whatever? Like that has a bigger economy than pretty much every country in Africa. Does that blow your mind? We are so wired to exchange things and try to get one up on somebody else that the World of Warcraft body of subscribers was millions of people, larger than all of the standing armies of the world combined at the time of its peak. EVE Online, Robinhood stocks, although Robinhood and stonks have been kind of more of a meme than a real thing lately. That exchange of value, that information arbitrage is, information asymmetry is really, really, really satisfying for some people to play or even exploit. Customization, we'll see some more examples of this, but if you've ever bought like DLC for a video game and paid like more than you paid for the value of the game in DLC to like dress up your virtual character in some way or kit out their assault rifle or something like that, you understand the sense of satisfaction that playing that game and unlocking some of those customizations can be. Electronic Arts is notorious for turning games like the recent Star Wars Battlefront into basically a cash grab by allowing people to customize their experience, buying one character to play at the game at a time. You can unlock Darth Vader for X hundreds of dollars of loot crates or whatever. For that sense of pride and accomplishment was how Electronic Arts defensive press release described that. Sense of pride and accomplishment, throwing money at a game publisher to play as Darth Vader. Okay. We'll talk about how all games have a sense of progression. Every game tells its story. From Sharks and Minnows, there's a real quick, about 2-minute story, and the story is mostly the same every time we play it. A game like Tag, very abstract, but there's still a beginning and an end to a game like Tag, or Freeze Tag, or Chain Tag, or any of the other variants of Tag. Okay, so training up your Pokemons, or combining your materia and leveling up the materia in your old Final Fantasy VII Buster Sword or whatever. People understand this sense of, I want to be feeling more powerful or more accomplished or able to do new things or the same things with more efficiency or in a different way. A lot of games have advancement as a function of customization, the choices that you get to make within the game world. For those of you who like board games, a lot of Euro games are super into customization. So $100, $150 board games like Gloomhaven, for example. Persistence across multiple game sessions of a board game. It's basically Dungeons and Dragons, but in board game format. You level up the characters. They get new attacks and pile on new equipment cards and stuff like that, and they can do different things than they could at level 1, unlocking new characters and so forth. And finally, completion. Anybody like an Xbox badge completionist? Has anybody ever played a game to 100% completion? Me neither. Yeah, okay. That's a thing for some people, though. There are lots of YouTube videos out there with millions of views. Millions of people sat on their phones or on their flat screen TVs watching somebody else play a video game all the way through to 100% completion. Because even by proxy, even not being the one behind the joysticks, MK Ice and Fire is one very popular YouTuber that does this in high definition. Getting badges, unlocking achievements, seeing the whole thing played out and edited together nicely in high def and streamed to you, that's a very satisfying thing, even if you're not playing the game, which is bizarre, okay? So, let's get into the components of a good game. Most of these components are going to be pretty recognizable as any one of these basic fundamental mechanics. We'll talk about rules and mechanics and what the difference is between them here in just a sec. There's a dozen or more components of pretty much every game. And some of them are pretty small and hard to notice. Others are right there in your face. So take a second to imagine a couple of your favorite games. See if you can identify each of the following things. Most all of these are going to be in most every game. All right. So that's central metaphor. Chess being about war. Sharks and Minnows being about food web dynamics. Population dynamic equilibrium. We can get some pretty advanced wildlife biology into a game of Sharks and Minnows. And we can have little kids starting to think about stuff like boom-bust economies, feast or famine population dynamics, boom and die out, okay? Cool. Pretty much every game that lasts has some kind of an emotional basis. It's wrapped around typically a single core key emotional response. You and I, most of us, unless we are psychopaths, and the odds are in our favor, there's about a 1% psychopathy prevalence in the United States population, so about 3 million psychopaths out there, think about that. For all the rest of us, we experience emotions, and those emotions make us do things. We don't make a lot of rational decisions all day long. We go with how we feel instead of what we believe. Most always. Okay. So every game triggers some kind of an emotion. Whether it's a very common emotion like satisfaction of, oh yes, I just unlocked World 4 in Super Mario Brothers. Blue Yoshi is here we go. Every shell I eat is gonna be a flying Yoshi for me. Noise, as Key and Peele would say. To something like Fiero, that sense of, yes, I'm up out of my seat because my footy team in the World Cup just clinched the thing, and so forth. Every game has some emotional basis. If it's the recent SCP game, Secure, Contain, Protect, the fear, the emotion that the game might be wrapped around is fear, or a sense of, we'll talk about, let's see, it's the horror cycle. Fear, dread, and horror in that order for interpretive experiences that you want to wrap around that, like ghost stories, for example. Historic interpretation involving ghost stories. All right? Every game has rules and mechanics. Rules are the fence around the outside of the game to keep your players safe and to keep the game on track. Rules are things like the game starts when X. We all know that the game is over when Y. We know who won the game if the game is designed to have a winner when Z. Those are rules. Boundaries around the outside of the experience primarily keep people safe, secondarily to send clear signals. Mechanics are how we get from that starting, the initial condition, to the end condition, a lose or victory condition. Okay? So, in interpretation, we're going to typically crank down pretty hard on the rules so that the game is fast, so that it's portable, so that it's applicable to a wide range of interpretive experience participants. Whether you're older or younger, more mobile or less mobile, high energy, low energy, whatever your status is your status, no big deal. We want to fit the game to you, and the rules, modifying the rules even on the fly, are how we do that. The mechanics are the internal bits of how that goes. Pretty much every game, except for where an unequal initial footing is the point, pretty much every game starts with a fair field, a level playing field, is a metaphor that you've heard before. Okay? And that is a rule and a starting condition, right? Initial condition, that as the interpreter, you are absolutely free to break on purpose, but break it only on purpose. Okay? If the game is going to potentially elicit some negative emotion response from participants who start feeling frustrated about how the mechanics of the game are unfolding, round by round, or turn by turn, or play by play, those are mechanics, then we gotta go back and think, okay, did I really start everybody off on equal initial footing? In chess, everybody has the same pieces arranged in the same ways on a symmetric game board. Equal initial footing. Now, you might bring more or less strategy or skill to the game of chess, and that's not fair, necessarily, to the other player. But within the game itself, it's purely and perfectly fair, except for minor discrepancies or disputes on who gets to go first in a turn-based game like that. Okay? So, equal initial footing, super important, unless it's super important for your particular topic to break this one in particular. All right. There's some balance of team play and competition. That is, co-op mode, everybody looking the same direction, pulling on the same rope in the same way, versus everybody at loggerheads, metaphorically speaking, and trying to accomplish at the expense of an opponent or an opposing team or multiple opposing teams. Okay? We'll talk about lots of different examples where it's pure cooperative, pure competition, like Squid Games level, pure competition, King of the Hill style stuff, and then a bunch of different sort of gradations in between. You can have people working together on teams cooperatively, and the teams are against each other. You can have games that shift that balance of team play and competition throughout, right? So Sharks and Minnows is a dynamically balanced teamwork and competition game when you get down to thinking about it. All right, most all games, all the good games provide iterative strategy feedback. So if a game is divided into 5 rounds, if you've never played the game before, your efforts on the first round are going to be pretty low skill, pretty low information. You don't really know what you're doing yet. You're just trying this game on for the first try. But by the end of round 5, you've had 4 or 5 rounds to practice and get a sense of, okay, when I did this, I got penalized and I lost some points in the game, or I didn't gain as many points as I could have if I'd gone this other way. So I went this other way and I got a whole bunch of points. That is iterative feedback on strategy. Round by round, you have meaningful choices to make. Except for where the central metaphor of the game, part of the message of the game, this part of your interpretive height, or skill challenge out in the field, or whatever, where the message is the choices you make inside the context of this game don't matter. The system is rigged. Usually it's rigged against the players to send a message of, hey, look at these circumstances that these settlers had to overcome, or look at these difficult battles that indigenous peoples had to fight, or whatever, and the sort of setup was kind of rigged against them. All right, there's a sense of, through the progression of mechanics, through the iterations of the iterative strategy feedback, there's a sense of a beginning, middle, and an end to the game. Just like any other kind of storytelling tool, games start in one place, and then they move through some other places, like the mid-game section of it, and then there's some finale. And the game's state has changed. The number of tokens you control on the board is more or fewer. The different choices that you can make are typically different, more or less constrained at the end of the game versus being exactly the same as at the beginning. Tic-tac-toe, as simple as it is, has a real progression to it. Your choices, the available options that you have, change dramatically in the course of, 4 or 5 or 6 rounds, typically? Up to 9 rounds? In that. All right. A good game will have representative tokens and roles. So, tic-tac-toe, just X's and O's. They don't represent anything other than X is one player and O's are other player. And you need at least that much information to record keeping to play that simple game. But in a game that is wrapped around the central metaphor of warfare, we have kings and queens and bishops. Ever think about how weird it is to have clergy in a warfare game? Unless you're a Warhammer fan, in which case, Adeptus Sororitas and stuff like that, like everybody has guns, including the nuns. Or Mandalorians, like weapons are a part of my religion, right? Okay. For interpretive games, we really, really, really want to go hard on representative tokens and roles. So tokens are physical objects that you manipulate inside the game. You collect them, you destroy them, you move them on a game board. Maybe you are the token, or your players are the tokens, and so forth. And the roles use meaningful names or labels for those roles. Okay? So a knight moves like a knight on the battlefield of chess. And a game makes more sense when the roles, you don't have to do any translation or guesswork with it. When the sharks eat minnows, that's clear, and it saves you a bunch of explanation. And nobody's there for explanation, they're there to play a game. So, be very efficient with your communication by using representative tokens and roles. All right, the internal economy of the game is the points. Are the resource cards in Settlers of Catan? Are the armor sets in World of Warcraft? Are the, you can customize darn near all the furniture on your assault rifle in Call of Modern Warfare Fortnite, all of these things are things that you gain or lose or sell or buy or earn or trade or whatever. So that's all economy. Resources flowing from player to player, resources flowing from the bank to players in the case of Monopoly, or to the bank. Also, in the case of Monopoly, to be a soul-crushing lesson, moral lesson on the dangers of capitalism, as it turns out, and so forth. Okay, so internal economy, super huge. Now, remember, as the interpreter, you control the game. And you are modifying the game for the purposes of interpreting, sometimes on the fly. So if in the middle of the game, the energy level is a little bit too high, you can modify the game. Add in a mechanic that down regulates it to a safer level for your participants so they're running into each other at full speed, knocking each other's teeth out. Modify the internal economy. Okay, so we're playing The Floor is Lava, and we are modeling, let's say, the island hopping movements of Polynesian cultures, folks, across the Pacific over the past 20,000 years, like, Moana style. What happens if we pull out this island from the island chain, and now we force a faster or slower progression, an easier or a harder progression from beginning of game to end of game? And you can pull that island off the map, even though that doesn't make sense in reality. You can say, oh, wow, storms blew you off course around this island and you never saw it. You can modify the game on the fly. So all of this is interpreter leadership. You are tasked ethically with modifying the game. You're not just a game facilitator. You're using this as a tool. You're using the game to accomplish something more than just playing games, more than just filling time, more than just entertaining people. Again, this all comes back to connection. What's that core topic? What's something that you're passionate about? How does this game help people connect with that thing of passion? Okay? And finally, every game has very clear victory conditions. The goal of the game. In poker, get all of everybody else's chips. Go home and laugh all the way to the bank. Right? In Monopoly, get all of everybody else's stuff and mortgage them to the hilt and, send everybody to jail. The clear victory condition in your favorite game is what? Serious question. So think about your favorite game. What's the goal of that game? Let's hear from you guys. Yo.
Checkmate the king.
Checkmate the king. Okay. Anybody else?
I'm
Yeah.
like so close to completely beating Stardew Valley. So yeah, collect all the things.
Collect all the things.
Yeah.
All right. And who sets that goal? Who decided, I want to collect all the things, or you should collect all the things?
Like that's a personal goal, I guess.
Personal
because,
goal.
Yeah,
Good.
you can finish. You could say the game is finished already to a certain extent, but there's still much more that you can do.
Awesome. We're going to come back to that. Who sets the goal? Anybody else? Your favorite game? What's its victory condition? What's the goal? What's the end state of dropping the controller and going, I have nothing else to live for now. I have accomplished this thing. It's over. There's no going back to who I was. We've all learned something today. What's your favorite game? What is the victory condition of it? Anybody else? Mike?
Add-on, it's like rock climbing, so then like one person will add a move, have that move add on an additional move, so then whoever can last the longest wins versus fall off moves.
Okay. So who sets that goal? Is that something that each person decides for themselves, like in Stardew Valley, or is this pretty much this is everybody's shared goal for the game, no matter what your personal feelings are on it, because that's the game?
I think it's probably, doesn't matter who's on it, just, one person wins, one person loses.
Okay. So you can use the victory condition of a game to help communicate whatever message you need the game to communicate. Okay? You can surprise people and help people think about your topic in a very new way by having a game with a very clear, very commonly shared and well understood goal, victory condition, endpoint. And subvert that endpoint and say, we're going to play Sharks and Minnows, and then for round 2 say, all right, our goal here is to have the Sharks starve. They don't get any of the minnows. Let's see how that goes. Okay, play round 2. and see how that goes. So you're not chained to, in interpretation, what the usual or expected goal is. You can subvert, as it's called, that expectation and really help people sort of come alive in that moment and think about something that's very old, a very new way. Build some pretty cool insights and connections and sensation out of that, okay? So I'm gonna kind of blitz through the next slides. We've already explained most of them. I'll post this PowerPoint on our website in case you'd like to take notes that way. So forth, central metaphors, emotional basis, we've already talked about rules and mechanics, equal initial footings, so forth, player normalization. Player normalization is another word for level playing field, or another phrase for is it? It does. All right. The game is over at that moment. Okay, cool. With victory conditions, we can have optional multiple parallel conditions. You don't have to tell the group all of the possible victory conditions. As the interpreter, you probably want to have a pretty good idea of multiple possible victory conditions that you select and tune the game toward based on what your needs are with that specific individual group, okay? Very, very common technique. So, for iterative feedback, we'll just add the caveat that the shorter the iterative feedback cycles are, the turns, the rounds, the cycles, the deliberation time for each person adding one more hold to a climbing route in a climbing game, that helps build and maintain a sense of focus and that sense of progress. Has anybody ever played Diplomacy or Risk? Okay. How long can some of those games go? Weeks. It's hard to maintain that kind of focus and basically impossible to have weeks of exposure or contact time with folks in an interpretive context within forestry. So 5 to 15 seconds, yeah, if you can tune your game to be that lean and that efficient and that quick, good for you, okay? Now, we don't want to lose anybody, overwhelm anybody with short cycles that they're struggling with, and other folks are able to move past them and exploit that differential and capacity to play the game. We need to be aware of that, but because we are designing these experiences, we have excellent control over these problems and can tune things as we go. All right, so a good game can induce, induces a sense of flow, a sense of peak or near peak performance and learning that is cresting along the top of the wave without getting overwhelmed by the complexity, overwhelmed by the learning curve, overwhelmed by the barrier to entry, the wall you got to get over to even engage with the game. And it's also not a small enough swell that it's uninteresting, but there's no challenge and so forth. So flow is this so-called peak state, peak arousal of riding the top of the wave or surfing in the pipeline, not being too far ahead, not being too far behind, but kind of in an exciting way, balancing on the edge of your skill and learning as you go, okay? That's according to researchers based on the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. All right, progression is like a good beer, nice nose, good head, nice long finish, and so forth. If you know what your OC is, then you get customization games or personalization games. This is from the old Mass Effect game. These look so 2012 because they're so 2012. The Harry Potter game that Kotaku and Gamergate folks are melting down over right now has an absolutely stupefying amount of personalization, customization. You can make your toon or avatar or character in the game look however you want it to in a lot of customized ways, and so forth. Okay? So, these things are more interesting to talk about as we are playing around and prototyping with games, so we're not going to lecture on them too hard and continuously. That brings us to presentation and look and feel. So, along the lines of your game's central metaphor, you want to have a consistent look and feel, a consistent presentation that it looks like what it's about. If if you have a game about predator-prey dynamics and the tokens in the game are just abstract colored chips, it might be functional, but it's more confusing than it has to be. Make the things look like what they represent. That's part of the look and feel. Have a unifying graphical appearance to it. So if your game prototypes here later in the semester are necessarily a bunch of clip art from a whole bunch of different corners of the internet, okay, that's a good start for a draft of a game. But for the production environment, everything's got to look like it was done typically by the same artist or team of artists guided by a conceptual designer, so that you don't have kind of style whiplash, like you have, you know, anime spiky hair on this character over here, and then like sepia tone historical photograph of this character over here. Like putting those together, it's a little bit too jarring, and people start focusing on those weird, inexplicable differences versus on the message, versus on the content, playing of the game, and so forth. So the fewer fonts that you use, the fewer well-curated colors that you use, like color triads or color tetrads, 3 or 4 major colors in the design of the game, the better that game's going to go every time. Because we don't have to rationalize or rectify why there are weird style gaps. It looks very thrown together and cheap and inconsistent in that way. Okay, so you are interpreting with a consistent approach and high quality art assets. You are interpreting to the visitor, the participant, the player of the game, something of the value of the subject of the game. Is the value of this thing only worth slapping together a bunch of illegal art that I downloaded and I'm, you know, printing, you know, without artist authorization, violating copyright and stuff like that? Or did we really put some work into this? This is easier than ever, starting this semester with tools like Stable Diffusion. You may have heard of AI art image generators that are blowing up the internet right now and freaking out a lot of concept artists and character artists. But for free, in the course of a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes, you can type in a descriptor, including style cues of the kind of image that you would like, or increasingly the kind of video clip that you would like, and the computer will generate it from scratch. Not from scratch, a trained database of 4.5 billion images stolen from all across the internet, but you can get fairly consistent results across those, for example. Okay, so if you're in forestry because you kind of suck at art like I do, I mean, I'm in forestry for a lot of reasons, that's just one of them, but this year, for the first time, we have a way to have good, high-quality art assets in your game prototype for free. Pretty cool stuff. All right, moving on from there. You want to think about, okay, if I'm building a game from scratch, if I'm not just putting a fresh coat of paint, a new metaphorical layer on top of something like tag or sharks and minnows or chess or checkers or shuffleboard or beer pong or whatever, pro tip, don't adapt drinking games to interpretation. Everybody understands what's going on and it looks so trashy. Moving on. If you are building a game from scratch, researchers like Booker have suggested that pretty much all games have one of 6 or 7 basic plots. So overcoming the monster, conquering Darth Vader, the classical monomyth, as it's called by Conrad and others. Defeating the bad guy, the masked villain. Darth Vader, literally a masked villain, right? Kylo Ren, for you youths, literally a masked villain who undergoes a redemption. All right, completing the quest, the hero's journey, right? Going out to a difficult and dangerous place, transforming, being transformed, overcoming difficult environmental challenges and antagonist challenges, sometimes surviving, sometimes not, but coming back after a symbolic or literal resurrection and bringing the object of the quest, the MacGuffin, the Maltese Falcon or whatever, back to the quest giver or back to the mundane world, right? Frodo and Bilbo both return to the Shire after their crazy adventures and so forth. That's a quest. And people get the idea of a quest. This is baked into our mythos, our stories of how to understand the world all the way through. Every culture has a sense of the idea of quests, whatever those take shape as. Comedy, we'll get into what makes something funny a little bit later on in the class, so put a pin in that if you're not real sure how to design a game to be funny. We'll get there. But a comedy is basically understood as someone else's pain, someone else's tragedy or misfortune, and it's safe for us to experience that tragedy or misfortune by proxy. Think how many slapstick comedies involve people getting their face bashed in or walking through plate glass, or kicking the crotch, or losing romantic aspirations in hilarious ways. There's a lot of comedy that involves somebody's, typically the character's, pain, and it is safe for participants to experience that pain, not directly, but by proxy. Tragedy is a game style that is less common, a lot less common in interpretation, because tragedies usually take a little bit longer to set up and execute. And we generally have on the order of minutes for most games. But everybody can identify with the temptation to vanity, the temptation to greed, the temptation to lust, or to sloth, or to fill in any of the other mortal or venal sins for those of you who are from a religious background. We all get that. Games like Oregon Trail, partially a game about journey, partially a game, if you want to structure it that way, about quest, getting to the Willamette Valley, partially about the losses and difficulties experienced along the way. Sometimes the characters just die of dysentery for no great reason, when they could have stayed on the East Coast and probably been fine, but just never really tested the limits of their strength or endurance or capacity to overcome. Tragedy. It's a powerful thing. We can all identify with that because it all prompts this question, what if? What if that were me? How would I do? Okay. Rebirth stories. This is a very satisfying kind of story. Disney understood this better than anybody. Think about how many magical, metaphorical, or social transformations the main characters go through. Rags to riches is one kind of rebirth. Okay? That is an economic or money-based rebirth type story. Finally, the hero's journey has a pretty specific setup. It's got a whole bunch of parts to it. We can talk about that more if you're curious about the hero's journey style game. Those tend to be much longer format, so less common for Interp. And we'll end a little bit early today with games with lasting effect. And then we'll jump into our game design exercise homework. So, for a game with lasting effect, even if it's a 3 to 5 minute long interpretive game, you want to reverse engineer, flip the process of playing the game on its head, so that we identify where we're getting to, where we're building to, and work backwards from that. So, we want to identify key moments in the game. The big boss's surprise betrayal reveal. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it was our helper and companion the whole time. I thought this was going to be that other Zelda game where the little annoying pixie is just giving me info and helpful stuff. Dang it. Okay? What is the underlying emotion? Is it surprise? Is it that sense of, top 10 anime betrayal? Is it fiero? Is it fear or horror or a sense of loss, tragedy? Is it happiness, satisfaction, that emotional sense of growing or gaining in some way? Okay? This is the linchpin around which everything else gets built. What kind of an emotional state do you want to elicit or out of your players and participants? What kind of experience do you want them to have? Fundamentally, we are emotional creatures. We can't get past it. So as goofy as it is to talk about in a forestry class, select that emotion based out of the key moment of the game. That satisfaction, that fiero, that sense of defeat. That's part of the message. And identify that emotion out of it. And then from there, you just wrap game mechanics around that. pick a starting point, pick an ending point, figure out how to get there through the mechanics, put some safe boundaries around that with rules, and that's a pretty good game. That's a game that somebody's going to remember. That's a game that somebody's going to engage in, participate in, play, like really be into, even though it might be a totally arbitrary, totally mental or thought exercise kind of a game even. That's what works. That's how game designers think. Okay? So, one highly affective emotional response is a sense of challenge mastery. So, games are, for our purposes this semester, going to include things like challenges, low ropes course, high ropes course, skills challenges of all kinds. It doesn't have to be an athletic one, it can be a mental challenge. Like, let's see how many things each of us can identify that we can see right where we're standing. Everybody's going to have a slightly different list. Some lists are going to be real long, some lists are going to be pretty short. And by insinuating or flat out stating, all right, let's see who can get the most, now it's a competition. That adds a challenge element or a game-like element. It's not a complete, fully realized game, but it is at least a challenge. And for the person that wins that arbitrary little 30-second challenge, they're going to remember that all day long. Their brains are a flood with neurotransmitter neurochemicals that right in that moment of winning the little challenge, even though it doesn't mean anything per se on its own. Per se just means by itself. That gets etched into their memory on a physical, structural, electrical level of neuron formation. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, so does this need to be a fully realized game with all the freight and the furniture, tokens and rolls and all of this stuff? Can it just be a challenge mastery thing? Can we play The Floor is Lava with a mixed group of folks and have that represent something ecologically or historically or conceptually related to our topic and experience a sense of challenge mastery as a group or as teams competing against each other or teams all competing against the same environment but not against each other, or individual challenge mastery within those teams, within the whole group without teams, whatever. All of the different ways are possible. Okay, cool. So, let's end it with a game design exercise. Think about any of your topics for this semester that you like. Or you can pick a conventional forestry topic like a particular species of tree. Or if you're coming in from another program, some core topic of that program. Like in the rec department, you guys have 1.5 billion games already. Just dust one off, I'll never know. For next Wednesday, we'll have some time on Monday, assuming we don't get iced out again, a chance to work on these and prototype stuff and throw ideas at each other, so to speak, sounding board for each other. Just kind of a design charrette kind of a day. Charrettes are informal little committees to accomplish certain small tasks. So Monday is going to be kind of a work day more than a lecture day, all right? But the whole idea is start to think about putting together a game. Again, that could be from explaining it through finishing the game, through debriefing the game, talking about what did we learn here, what did we experience in this game, how do you suppose this relates to our topic? Sometimes it's a pretty easy connection, sometimes you need to help scaffold that conversation and build that connection of understanding after the game. Something that can be done as quickly as 3 to 5 minutes. It could be a board game, it could be an outside game that we participate in with our bodies, it could be a thought exercise kind of a game, it could be a skill challenge. Right? We talked about lots of different examples. Indoor, outdoor, active, mental, whatever. Whichever direction you'd like to go, whatever fits best, makes the most sense, or seems the most appealing and functional relative to any of your topics for this semester. Does that make sense? All right. So, on Monday, since this is for Wednesday, come on in with any tokens that you need, even if they're just little scraps of colored paper, if it's a token-based game. If it's an outdoor game where we're meant to run around and play Sharks versus minnows, something like that. Bring a big rope to serve as the boundary in a large, open, safe, grassy, flat space to play that game. So we have some sense of the rule of not crossing that outer boundary for everyone's safety, and so forth. So bring in any prototype materials that you need on Monday, and we'll aim to have kind of a first draft of a game for each individual if you want, or if you want to pair up with somebody, go that direction and work with somebody to sort of bounce ideas off with, and the two of you produce this first prototype game design for one topic of either of your choosing, and we'll go from there. Okay? Clear as mud? Good to go? Yes, question?
I just wanted to ask, what was the time constraint for the game?
Time constraint for the game. Playable in as few as 3 to 5 minutes, and you can certainly go longer than that if you would like to. Okay. But if it takes 5 minutes just to explain the rules, we need to pare it way, way, way down. We'll talk about some useful constraints a little bit later after we've had a chance to kind of jump in with this and see how it works. Okay. So, we'll be going for a 2 to 3 sentence rule guideline convention.
And you said it's okay, like this doesn't have to be an OG game. Like this is something that we can pull elsewhere. Okay.
Yeah, totally. Pretty much every game design has been implemented already in some capacity.
Yeah.
We just kind of replace the symbolism and metaphor as necessary, and yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. You're not on the hook to come up with something absolutely
Okay.
nobody's ever seen before. It'll probably be incomprehensible.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Due dates on D2O
Yeah.
are all like summer dates.
Yes. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a consequence of importing it from previous years.
Wonderful.
And bringing it forward.
Okay. Cool.